The neuroscience of gambling behavior and gambling addiction is an area that has really taken off in the last few years in terms of the research. And a lot of the research there has focused on a brain network that we call the brain reward system. But we know that this system is really interested in learning about things that generate reward, and it's also interested in making decisions between things that might be rewarding. And we know that dopamine is an important neurotransmitter in that system, and that dopamine is, of course, the same neurotransmitter that drugs of abuse act upon. And what we know from the research in the last few years is that gambling as a behavior and winning money in gambling games clearly drives that system in the brain. And we can also see how certain features of gambling games might be particularly potent in driving that system. So some of our own work, for example, has looked at gambling near misses within a slot machine, and we can see that although these are loss events, nevertheless, the brain reward system responds and is activated by near misses. And then some of the recent work has started to probe the integrity of that system in people with gambling problems as well. And the jury is still out about the story there, with some experiments indicate that this system is underactive, and therefore that gamblers might play to try and compensate for that underactivity. Other experiments indicate that these areas in the brain seem to be overactive or hypersensitive. And the experiments are still ongoing, trying to decide between those two alternatives. Developments in this area in the last year or two has been this formal recognition of problem gambling, what's now called gambling disorder, as a behavioral addiction. And this has come about in the DSM-5, which is the major set of guidelines within psychiatry for diagnosing mental illness. And problem gambling has moved category within the DSM-5 so that it is now officially within the addictions alongside substance addictions, and it's the first recognized behavioral addiction within that category. And the neuroscience work has been one of the pivotal lines of evidence that really drove that decision. But nevertheless, we can still see that drugs of abuse like cocaine, alcohol, nicotine are very powerful, very potent in driving that brain reward system. So there are still some conceptual questions that remain about how gambling as a behavior, a learned behavior, how can gambling come to control those brain systems with the same level of power that drugs of abuse can? So at the Centre for Gambling Research at UBC, we're really interested in the psychology and also the neuroscience of gambling behavior. And our approach very much gives equal emphasis to the characteristics of gambling games and how they interact with the characteristics or the dispositions of people who go on to develop gambling problems. One of the exciting features that we have in the new lab is a casino lab where we're able to study some modern slot machines in a controlled laboratory environment, and that work is really going to enable us to drill down on some of the specific features of modern games, looking at near misses, control features, losses disguised as wins, the speed of play, and we're also going to be able to look at the psychological effects of those features on the player. So, for example, we're starting to look at immersion and that state of being in the machine zone where players lose sense of time and lose sense of what's going on around them. And so this casino lab is one of only a few facilities like this around the world, and that's really going to enable us to take this work forward, and we'll be merging neuroscience techniques with that as well. For example, we do a lot of work looking at physiological arousal in terms of heart rate or sweating, skin conductance changes while people gamble. So this emphasis, the equal weighting of both the gambling form and the gambler, is really where we're trying to focus.